What happens when the strongest human being on the planet gets humiliated on live television by people half his size? Mark Henry found out the hard way, discovering that being able to deadlift 900 pounds means absolutely nothing when you don't know how to work a microphone or tell a story in the ring. Mark Gerald Henry was born June 12, 1971, in Silsbee, Texas, into a family where being enormous wasn't unusual. It was genetic destiny. His great-uncle Chud stood 6'7" and weighed approximately 500 pounds, never owned a pair of manufactured shoes, and was a local legend for his impossible feats of strength. In the Henry family tree, Mark wasn't an anomaly. He was the next evolution. The stories from Mark's childhood sound like folklore. At age 10, he was already lifting weights that grown men struggled with. His junior high football coaches had to create special training protocols because traditional strength programs were laughably inadequate for someone with his natural gifts. Teachers would find him casually lifting desks and equipment that required multiple adults to move. By age 12, Mark was already showing signs of his freakish genetic gifts. While other kids played video games, he was naturally gravitating toward lifting anything he could get his hands on. His high school years in Texas became the stuff of legend, not just for his athletic prowess, but for the way he effortlessly dominated every strength-based activity he attempted. The numbers were staggering even then. As a high school sophomore, Henry was squatting weights that college seniors couldn't handle. His deadlift numbers were breaking state records before he was old enough to drive. Local powerlifting enthusiasts would travel from other counties just to watch this teenager move impossible weights with the casual ease of someone picking up groceries. The powerlifting world first took notice when Henry became a national champion while still in high school. This wasn't just teenage success. These were numbers that grown men couldn't achieve. His raw strength was so extraordinary that experts began questioning whether they were witnessing the emergence of the strongest human being who had ever lived. What made Henry's early success even more remarkable was his complete lack of formal training. While other powerlifters spent years perfecting technique under experienced coaches, Henry was essentially teaching himself. His natural movement patterns were so efficient that seasoned lifters would study his form, trying to understand how someone so young could generate such incredible power. The teenager from Texas wasn't just breaking records, he was obliterating them. His squat numbers shattered previous high school marks by hundreds of pounds. His deadlift performances left spectators questioning whether they had witnessed something physically impossible. Meet directors had to double-check equipment calibration because Henry's lifts seemed to defy known human limitations. But Henry's path wasn't typical. Unlike other strength athletes who focused obsessively on a single discipline, he seemed to excel at everything involving raw power. Olympic weightlifting, powerlifting, strongman competitions. Whatever he touched, he dominated. It was as if his body had been specifically designed for moving impossible weights. College recruiters from major universities began making pilgrimages to East Texas, not for football or basketball prospects, but to witness this strength phenomenon firsthand. They came expecting to see a typical high school athlete with good numbers. They left having witnessed something that challenged their understanding of human physical capability. The transition from high school phenom to Olympic athlete happened with startling speed. Henry's natural ability in Olympic weightlifting caught the attention of national coaches who saw in him the potential to compete at the highest levels of international competition. The technique required for Olympic lifting was completely different from powerlifting, more explosive, more technical, demanding perfect timing and coordination. What amazed coaches was how quickly Henry adapted. Olympic weightlifting typically requires years of technical development, with most elite athletes starting as children. Henry picked up the complex movement patterns in months, combining his raw strength with an intuitive understanding of leverage and timing that couldn't be taught. The 1992 Barcelona Olympics marked Henry's first appearance on the world's biggest sporting stage. At just 21 years old, competing against seasoned international veterans, Henry held his own in ways that shocked the weightlifting community. While he didn't medal, his performance served notice that American weightlifting had found its next great hope. The experience of competing in Barcelona was transformative for Henry. The international pressure, the media attention, the realization that he was representing his country on the world's biggest sporting stage. It all crystallized his understanding of what elite athletic competition truly meant. 4 years later, the 1996 Atlanta Olympics provided Henry with a home field advantage and increased expectations. By this point, his training had become more sophisticated, his technique more refined, but his raw power remained the foundation of everything he accomplished. The Atlanta Games represented the pinnacle of his Olympic weightlifting career. Training for the Atlanta Olympics pushed Henry to new levels of dedication and focus. The home crowd advantage meant additional pressure, but also incredible motivation. American weightlifting hadn't produced a medal contender in years, and Henry carried those hopes on his massive shoulders. Between Olympic cycles, Henry's dominance in regional competition was absolute. The 1995 Pan American Games became his personal showcase, where he collected gold, silver, and bronze medals across multiple events. This wasn't just winning. This was systematic domination of an entire competition. The Pan Am performance proved that Henry's strength wasn't just impressive in American contexts. Against the best lifters from across the Western Hemisphere, he was still in a class by himself. International competitors began studying his technique, trying to understand how someone could generate such incredible power. But it was in powerlifting where Henry truly separated himself from every other human being on the planet. His world records in the squat and deadlift weren't just impressive, they were physics-defying numbers that seemed to rewrite the limits of human capability. Henry became WDFPF World Champion in 1995 and a two-time U.S. National Champion, holding world records in the squat, deadlift, and total. He holds the largest raw squat and raw powerlifting totals ever performed by a drug-tested athlete, regardless of weight class. These weren't enhanced performances. Henry achieved these impossible numbers completely naturally, making his feats even more remarkable. The powerlifting community struggled to comprehend what they were witnessing. Henry's combination of Olympic lifting technique and raw powerlifting strength created totals that many experts believed were theoretically impossible for a drug-free athlete. Yet there he was, moving weights that seemed to belong in science fiction rather than competitive lifting. While Henry was setting world records and competing in Olympics, professional wrestling was experiencing a period of unprecedented growth. WWE scouts had been monitoring the strength sports world, looking for legitimate athletes who could bring credibility to their expanding roster. Mark Henry represented the ultimate prize, not just a strong man, but potentially the strongest man who had ever lived. His Olympic credentials provided legitimate sporting credibility, while his world records offered promotional gold. WWE saw in Henry the chance to sign someone who was genuinely the world's strongest man, rather than just claiming the title. The recruitment process was unlike anything WWE had attempted before. They weren't just signing an entertainer who could learn to wrestle. They were courting a legitimate world-class athlete at the peak of his competitive powers. The negotiations had to account for Henry's ongoing Olympic aspirations, while transitioning him into professional wrestling. Henry's 1996 WWE debut was met with enormous expectations and immediate challenges. His strength was undeniable, but professional wrestling required skills that couldn't be measured in the pounds lifted. Ring psychology, character development, storytelling through physicality. These were entirely new disciplines for someone whose success had always come through pure athletic dominance. The learning curve was steep and occasionally frustrating. Henry's amateur wrestling background was minimal, and his Olympic lifting experience, while impressive, didn't translate directly to the theatrical demands of sports entertainment. Early matches were often awkward affairs, where his incredible strength couldn't compensate for his inexperience with wrestling fundamentals. WWE's development team faced a unique challenge. How do you teach entertainment skills to someone whose entire identity was built on legitimate athletic achievement? Henry's early character work felt forced, his promos lacked natural charisma, and his ring work, while powerful, often appeared clunky compared to seasoned professionals. The wrestling media was brutal in their early assessments. Critics questioned whether Henry's legitimate athletic credentials were enough to overcome his obvious inexperience with the entertainment aspects of professional wrestling. Some suggested he would never develop the intangible qualities that separated good wrestlers from great ones. The late 1990s became a testing ground for Henry's wrestling development, but also a period that nearly derailed his career before it truly began. WWE's creative team, struggling to find the right character direction for their legitimate strongman, made decisions that would haunt both Henry and the company for years. The sexual chocolate gimmick of 1999 represented everything wrong with how WWE initially handled Henry's transition from legitimate athlete to sports entertainer. The character played into racial stereotypes and crude humor that had nothing to do with Henry's legitimate strengths as a performer or his incredible athletic background. The creative direction was particularly frustrating because it ignored Henry's most compelling attributes. Here was a man who had competed in 2 Olympic Games, held multiple world records, and possessed legitimate athletic credibility that no other wrestler on the roster could match. Instead of building around these incredible accomplishments, creative chose to focus on cheap shock value and offensive stereotypes. Henry later admitted that this period was the lowest point of his early WWE career. He felt like his Olympic credentials and world record achievements were being ignored in favor of cheap shock value. The character work felt degrading, and his in-ring development stagnated as creative energy focused on controversial storylines rather than athletic improvement. The psychological toll was significant. Henry had spent his entire life being respected for his athletic achievements, only to find himself portrayed as a cartoon character in professional wrestling. The disconnect between his legitimate accomplishments and his on-screen persona created an identity crisis that took years to resolve. The physical demands of professional wrestling proved different from anything Henry had experienced in strength sports. Olympic lifting and powerlifting, while incredibly demanding, involved brief periods of maximum exertion. Professional wrestling required sustained output over 15 to 20-minute matches, multiple times per week, for months at a time. Henry's body, optimized for maximum strength rather than endurance, began breaking down under wrestling's unique stresses. Knee problems became chronic, requiring multiple surgeries that sidelined him for extended periods. Each injury setback meant starting his wrestling development over, losing momentum and ring chemistry that had taken months to build. The injury problems created a vicious cycle. Time away from wrestling meant losing conditioning and ring timing. Returning from injuries meant working harder to regain his previous level, which often led to new injuries. Critics began questioning whether Henry's body, despite its incredible strength, was simply not built for the demands of professional wrestling. Backstage, Henry's reputation during these early years was mixed at best. Veterans respected his legitimate athletic accomplishments, but questioned his commitment to learning wrestling fundamentals. His injury problems, combined with creative missteps, led to whispers that he might be better suited for part-time appearances rather than full-time wrestling. The frustration was mutual. Henry felt like WWE wasn't utilizing his strengths properly, while WWE officials felt like they had invested heavily in someone who wasn't delivering expected returns. The relationship between Henry and company management became increasingly strained. Some wrestlers openly questioned whether Henry had the wrestling mind necessary to succeed long-term. His background in individual sports didn't naturally translate to the collaborative nature of professional wrestling, where success depended as much on making your opponent look good as making yourself look impressive. The mid-2000s marked the beginning of Henry's real wrestling education. Company officials, recognizing that their investment in Henry needed better development, paired him with veteran wrestlers who could teach him the psychological aspects of the business. The decision to drop comedy characters and focus on Henry's natural intimidation factor proved transformative. Instead of forcing him into roles that highlighted his weaknesses, WWE began building around his obvious strengths, size, power, and genuine menace when properly motivated. Henry's ring work began showing noticeable improvement. His timing got better, his selling became more convincing, and his understanding of match psychology deepened considerably. The learning curve was still steep, but progress was finally visible to both critics and fans. The Hall of Pain era, beginning in 2011, represented the full flowering of everything Henry had been working toward for 15 years. At age 40, when most wrestlers are considering retirement, Henry delivered the best work of his career and arguably one of the most dominant heel runs of the modern era. The Hall of Pain gimmick was brilliantly simple. Henry was tired of being disrespected despite his legitimate credentials, and he was going to hurt people until they acknowledged his superiority. This character motivation felt authentic because it was essentially true. Henry had been overlooked and misused for years. What made the Hall of Pain era so effective was how it utilized Henry's legitimate background. His promos referenced his Olympic achievements, his world records, his decades of athletic excellence. For the first time in his WWE career, his real-world accomplishments became central to his character, rather than being ignored or downplayed. The physical presentation during this period was Henry at his most intimidating. He had learned to use his size and presence as psychological weapons, entering arenas with a menacing confidence that hadn't been present during his earlier years. His ring gear, his entrance music, his mannerisms, everything was designed to present him as a legitimate threat. His matches during this period showcased a wrestler who had finally mastered his craft. The power moves that had once seemed awkward now looked devastating. His promos, once stilted and uncomfortable, became genuinely intimidating. Henry had learned to weaponize his natural attributes in wrestling contexts. The Hall of Pain wasn't just a character transformation, it was a complete professional evolution. Henry's understanding of match psychology, his ability to work with opponents of different styles, his comfort with the entertainment aspects of wrestling, everything came together during this remarkable period. The World Heavyweight Championship reign in 2011 validated everything Henry had worked toward. After 15 years of false starts, injuries, and creative missteps, he was finally positioned as a legitimate main event threat. His feuds with Big Show and other top-tier talent proved he belonged at wrestling's highest levels. Henry's championship matches during this period were consistently praised for their intensity and storytelling. He had learned to use his size and strength, not just as physical advantages, but as psychological weapons that could dominate opponents before matches even began. The championship reign also proved Henry's drawing power. His pay-per-view main events performed well financially, demonstrating that fans would pay to see him compete at the highest levels. This commercial success finally silenced critics who had questioned his long-term viability as a top-tier performer. As Henry entered his 40s, his role within WWE evolved from main event competitor to respected veteran and mentor. This transition, which might have felt like a demotion earlier in his career, instead became one of his most valuable contributions to the wrestling business. Henry's willingness to put over younger talent while maintaining his own credibility became legendary within the company. He understood that his role was now to help develop the next generation of wrestlers, while occasionally reminding everyone that he was still capable of main event level work. His matches with younger wrestlers like Ryback, Braun Strowman, and others served as masterclasses in big man psychology. Henry could make relative newcomers look like legitimate threats while never diminishing his own reputation as a dangerous opponent. The 2017 retirement speech became an instant classic of professional wrestling storytelling. Henry's emotional farewell, complete with tears and genuine appreciation for his career, had the entire wrestling world convinced they were witnessing the end of his active career. The speech itself was a masterpiece of authentic emotion mixed with perfect wrestling psychology. Henry recounted his journey from Olympic athlete to WWE superstar, acknowledging the fans who had supported him through his struggles and celebrating the colleagues who had helped him improve. Every word felt genuine, every emotion seemed real. The setup was perfect. Henry had recently lost to Braun Strowman. He was 46 years old, and his emotional speech felt completely authentic. When John Cena interrupted to show respect, the moment felt like a perfect send-off for a wrestler who had finally earned universal respect. Cena's interruption added another layer of authenticity to the moment. The respect between the two wrestlers was genuine, built over years of working together and mutual professional admiration. When Cena spoke about Henry's contributions to the business, it carried weight because everyone knew he meant every word. The audience reaction was equally authentic. Fans who had once criticized Henry's early work were now giving him a standing ovation, recognizing the incredible journey he had taken from awkward newcomer to respected veteran. The emotional connection between performer and audience was palpable. The swerve, when Henry attacked Cena and revealed the retirement speech, was a ruse, was wrestling storytelling at its finest. The salmon suit reference became an instant meme, while the attack reminded everyone that Henry was still capable of shocking moments even in the twilight of his career. What made the swerve so effective was how it utilized the genuine emotions that had come before. Henry had fooled not just the audience, but seemingly himself, tapping into real feelings about his career to create a completely convincing performance. It was method acting applied to professional wrestling. Henry's actual retirement came more quietly, with his final WWE match occurring in 2018 and his last independent wrestling appearance in 2020. Unlike the theatrical retirement speech of 2017, his real farewell was understated and dignified. The wrestling world's reaction to Henry's legitimate retirement was overwhelmingly positive. Wrestlers, fans, and media who had once questioned his place in the business now praised his longevity, improvement, and contribution to wrestling culture. Henry's 2018 WWE Hall of Fame induction represented the ultimate validation of his quarter-century wrestling journey. The man who had once been criticized as a failed Olympic experiment had become a respected industry veteran worthy of wrestling's highest honor. His Hall of Fame speech was notable for its honesty about the challenges he faced and his appreciation for the people who helped him succeed. Henry acknowledged his early struggles while expressing gratitude for the opportunity to grow and improve over such an extended period. The induction also highlighted Henry's unique position in wrestling history. Few wrestlers could claim both Olympic credentials and Hall of Fame status. His combination of legitimate athletic achievement and wrestling success was virtually unprecedented. Post-retirement, Henry's transition to commentary and analysis proved his wrestling intelligence had developed far beyond his early career limitations. His insights into match psychology and wrestler development demonstrate a deep understanding of the business he had spent decades learning. His 2021 signing with AEW as a commentator and talent scout showed that his value to professional wrestling extended beyond his in-ring career. Henry's ability to evaluate and develop talent made him valuable to promotions looking to build their rosters with legitimate athletes. The commentary work also showcased Henry's personality in ways that his wrestling character work sometimes hadn't. His natural charisma, which had taken years to develop in wrestling contexts, seemed perfectly suited to broadcast work. Mark Henry's wrestling story isn't just about physical strength. It's about the strength to persist through failure, criticism, and setbacks that would have ended lesser careers. His journey from Olympic lifter to Wrestling Hall of Famer took 25 years because he refused to accept that early struggles defined his ultimate potential. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. Henry had to learn to derive satisfaction from different types of success. In strength sports, victory was objective and measurable. In wrestling, success required audience connection, storytelling ability, and collaborative creativity that couldn't be quantified on any scale. The man who could lift more weight than almost any human in history discovered that his greatest challenge wasn't moving objects, it was moving people's opinions. Every match was an opportunity to prove that legitimate athletes could succeed in sports entertainment, and every year he improved was another step toward earning the respect that had initially been withheld. What made Henry's persistence remarkable was his willingness to acknowledge his shortcomings while continuing to work on them. Lesser athletes might have relied purely on their legitimate credentials or become bitter about early struggles. Henry chose to treat every criticism as valuable feedback and every setback as a learning opportunity. Henry's career arc provides a blueprint for athletic reinvention that extends far beyond professional wrestling. His willingness to be bad at something new, to accept criticism and use it as motivation for improvement, and to persist through years of setbacks, offers lessons for anyone attempting to master unfamiliar skills. The wrestling industry itself benefited from Henry's journey. His eventual success proved that legitimate athletes could transition into sports entertainment given proper development time and creative support. His path influenced how future legitimate athletes would be integrated into professional wrestling. In the end, Mark Henry's greatest lift wasn't the impossible weights he moved in powerlifting competitions, or the opponents he slammed in wrestling rings. His greatest lift was elevating himself from a curiosity signing to a Hall of Fame legend, proving that true strength isn't just about what your body can do, it's about what your mind refuses to quit. The legacy extends beyond individual achievement. Henry's story demonstrates that excellence in one field doesn't guarantee success in another, but the mental qualities that create excellence, persistence, dedication, willingness to improve, are transferable across disciplines. His quarter-century journey from Olympic platform to Wrestling Hall of Fame stands as testament to the power of refusing to accept limitations.